Philippa Whitford, it's lovely to see you. We're back in Troon, and I think it was about 2 years ago we were in this lovely room, but they've stolen the piano, so that's not as much of a nice backdrop as it was. But we're going to talk about the reserve matters. Maybe you could just give us maybe a little rundown to help people understand what that is, first of all.
Well, I think it's often quite difficult for constituents and voters in Scotland to be clear what powers lie where. So as an MP you will get written to about matters that are under the control of the Scottish Parliament or maybe even local government, and people just think, well, I'll start with my MP, I'm not sure where to go. The key reserved powers are things like particularly benefits and pensions, and obviously they have a big impact on people. But also foreign policy, and obviously that's what allowed us to be dragged into the Iraq War. It's also what allowed Brexit to be forced onto Scotland, because these powers lie at Westminster. And very importantly, on top of benefits, is just the economic levers over taxation all largely lie at Westminster. The Scottish Parliament only has control over tax bands, and actually income tax is quite a limited tax to use, whereas tax on wealth, like inheritance tax, corporation tax, VAT, all of these kind of things are still all controlled from Westminster, as well as the overall economic policy.
Yeah, and of course if we had those taxation powers, we could make things more equal amongst people here, couldn't we? And we could then have more money to distribute to the things that we consider and people vote for here in Scotland. Because it's very difficult, isn't it? If you go to the Westminster Parliament, the English MPs can outvote everybody.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, Scotland is basically less than 10% of the MPs, so there's no possibility of the tail wagging the dog. Clearly, when you have a hung parliament, and there is some potential for that, then the smaller other opposition parties start to have the potential to have a louder voice and a bigger influence.
But then the Liberal Democrats tried this, didn't they, a few years ago?
They went into coalition. I wouldn't see the SNP going into coalition, but equally, if a future Labour Party needed additional votes, then you might be able to either influence them a bit back towards the left from the right that they're headed towards, but also from the point of trying to get them to listen to Scotland's voice and Scotland's right to decide its future. So, you know, having a strong SNP group there is really important. When we all went down as the 56 in 2015, it was quite odd because people somehow thought there were suddenly more Scottish MPs than they'd ever had.
Mr. Angus Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of my honourable and right honourable friends on the benches of the Scottish National Party, may I start by extending congratulations to the Father of the House and to you, Mr. Speaker, on your reappointment by the whole House. Before you assumed the role of a Speaker, you committed yourself to fairness across the House, to backbenchers and to all political parties. This was particularly important in the last Parliament to the SNP, a political party then with only 6 members, 1% of the membership of the House. Together with colleagues from the Welsh and the Northern Irish parties, we were called with fairness regularly on questions and debates and statements and the other business of the House. As you can see, Mr. Speaker, the SNP has returned with a great many more members than were here in the last Parliament. We represent 56 of Scotland's 59 constituencies. We are now the third party in this House, and we look forward to making Scotland's voice heard. We look forward to opposing austerity, and we will resolutely oppose the renewal of Trident weapons of mass destruction. We will have our voice heard, and we will play our full and fair part in the proceedings of this House of Commons. We still, however, support the fair treatment of smaller parties like the Liberal Democrats and the Green Party and the other really small parties who only have one member, like the Scottish Conservative Party, the Scottish Labour Party and the Scottish Liberal Democrats. We wish you, Mr. Speaker, well. We wish your deputies well. We wish the members of the Speaker's panel well. And we wish all members of this House, regardless of their party affiliation, well in the years ahead.
No, they were just talking about Scotland instead of just being part of UK Labour or part of the Conservative Party.
But they're going to drop the number, aren't they? We lose a couple of seats at the next election.
Yeah, we lose 2.
So it'd be 57 then, wouldn't it?
It would be, yes.
Right. So that actually is quite a neat adjunct to the next little thing that we're talking about, because we've got these reserved matters and then we've got the devolved powers. And the devolved powers, though, since Brexit, have been altering quite some. When we went back to the referendum of 2014, they promised in the vow that we'd get this and get that. And to a certain extent, I suppose they gave a couple of crumbs. But actually now, with the Internal Markets Act, things are rolling back somewhat.
Oh, absolutely. The Internal Market Act drives a coach and horses through devolution. We're seeing different techniques. You know, we saw the attempt to kind of bring the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child into Scots law. That was referred to the Supreme Court using Section 33. We saw the Gender Recognition Reform Act, even though it was voted for by 2/3 of MSPs.
The question is that motion 7312, in the name of Shona Robertson, on Gender Recognition Reform Scotland Bill be agreed, and members should cast their votes now. The result of the vote on motion 7312 in the name of Shona Robertson is yes 86, no 39. There were no abstentions. The motion is therefore agreed and the Gender Recognition Reform Scotland Bill is passed. Thank you all. We will continue with business. Thank you.
And gender recognition is devolved. We saw that blocked by a Section 35, and now we see the deposit return scheme blocked using the Internal Market Act. And that also follows, both Scotland and Wales had wanted to ban single-use plastics. They were made to wait until the UK government were ready to bring it in England. But then what has come in is a much more limited scheme than was being put forward. And the thing is, in the past, it was actually the devolved governments that were innovative around environment and public health. So Wales was the first to bring in a charge on plastic carrier bags. Scotland was the first with a smoking ban, the first with a minimum unit pricing on alcohol to try and tackle these things. And usually Westminster follows 3, 4, 5 years later. And now this, no, you're not allowed to do anything until we do it, is actually going to hold back progressive legislation for the whole of the UK. And much as people are quibbling over, okay, did we get everything right about the deposit return scheme? Should we have introduced it in a slightly different way? It still is something we need to do. Waste is as damaging as carbon dioxide to the environment. We are literally facing waste mountains. And if you go to some of the developing countries where we ship our waste to, they are drowning in our plastic bottles. And yet a company like Coca-Cola can't get hold of enough recycled plastic to make all of their bottles recycled. So, you know, we have this ridiculous situation. And of course, glass is what the UK government suddenly decided to object to. is the most dangerous litter and the most recyclable material. And in the UK, we only recycle about 60% of it. In Finland, where they have a DRS scheme, they recycle 95% of glass and 98% of plastic and aluminium. And across Europe, the vast majority of DRS schemes have glass in. So while maybe we didn't all get the small print right, I think what you're seeing is if there's debate and argument in Scotland over an issue, then the Westminster government, for purely political reasons, will go into that as a wedge and use their powers so that they go, aren't you lucky we have come in as the grown-ups and stopped the stupid Scottish government from doing X or Y. And I think we're going to see that going forward, whether it's trying to ban single-use vapes or any other legislation about protecting public health and the environment. And yet the single market, the European single market, had opt-outs for exactly those two things, environmental protection and public health. The Internal Market Act has no such opt-outs.
Yeah, this business is often driven by the people who make money, isn't it? And if it's, I don't know, these vape things that they throw away and somebody's making a lot of money by importing them from China or wherever they're made, then they tend to want to support that because that's what the Tories people want. But there was a poll not so long ago where I think that 60% of people would vote for independent Scotland on the basis of being a well-being economy. Because money is not everything, is it? I say this time and time again with all these little videos I make and these films I put together. But it's not 1, 2, 3. It's not how much money you've got in the bank. But this business then, maybe you could fill that out. I'm sure you can.
Well, a thing that I learned looking after cancer patients for so many years is that in actual fact, when your life is threatened by illness or some other circumstance, all of that rubbish falls away and you realise that in life there's only two things that are important. One is your health. You wish you had your health, you wish you had it back, you wish you had treasured it more when you were younger. And the other one is the people you love. Everything else, the car you drive, the size of your house, how much money you've got in the bank, is all peripheral to that. And actually, people who are struggling at the moment to have enough money to live, they're not doing it because they want to have more money. It's because they need to put food on the table. They want to keep a roof over their children. It's these kind of things. So when we talk about the first duty of government is security, we don't mean keeping Trident on the Clyde. We actually mean that security, the security of a roof over your head and enough to eat. Now, Scotland already has many well-being policies, and it is the policy of the Scottish Government. So we invest from the baby box, the Best Start grants that we give low-income families to try and make sure that at these challenging times when a baby is born, there's enough money there to grant them a decent start in life. We've obviously introduced the Scottish Child Payment, which means that Scotland now has one of the lowest levels of child poverty of any nation or region in the UK, but it's still too high, and that's because we're always fighting the impacts of decisions made at Westminster. And of course, the terrible Tory two-child limit and rape clause, and now we hear that Keir Starmer's planning to keep it. And so it just shows that the idea of a well-being approach to policy, there's no chance of that if we're in the Union. There's no chance of that from Westminster, no matter who's in power. So if Scotland was an independent country, then you actually can design a much more simplified tax and benefit system that supports people. And the idea of a well-being economy is not to just focus on GDP, which we hear so much about, but GDP actually counts positively things that are harmful, like tobacco production or gambling. Even proceeds of certain crimes are included in GDP. So GDP doesn't measure value in any sense. And so it's to look at the other side, which is well-being, in that we all only get one life and we want that life to be good quality. So what it is having policies that recognise that, if you like, pyramid of society is made up of individuals, families and communities. And if you invest in individuals and take a holistic approach, particularly to investing in children, then their better lives will actually contribute to your society and your economy. If you don't, if you drive children into poverty, we know brain development, general health, educational attainment, jobs in the future are all impacted. And many of them, sadly, will end up in a very negative situation of addiction or suicide or in the criminal justice system. And actually, a government's going to spend more money picking up those pieces. So why not invest in your children to start with? Now, what most people don't know is that the Scottish Government founded the Wellbeing Economy Governance Group way back in 2018 with Iceland and New Zealand, and other countries like Finland have joined since. And that is sharing research and looking at what makes a difference. And to me, this is the clear blue water between independence and being in the Union.
We often think of the economy as a straight line. We work hard to produce a lot so we can consume more, increase our gains, and spend it all again. But where does this take us? Our society and our planet? What if the economy was not a straight line, but more like a web, like a beautiful spider web? Without the spider, of course, with different lines representing values such as innovation, education, equality, health, that come together to make like an economy of well-being. That's the word. Must remember it. The economy of well-being. It's based on the simple idea that our well-being makes our economy grow, and the other way around. In this economy, success is not only measured in terms of productivity and gains, but also in terms of happiness, physical and mental health of citizens, sustainability. So, we invest in people's well-being, and they are healthier, more innovative and productive, and they work and pay taxes without feeling too bad about it, because the money they pay is used to improve their well-being. And work is not the only thing. People enjoy their work, of course, but they also have time for friends and family. Men and women are more equal, and you don't need to come from a rich family to get into university or to become a famous scientist. And we're not destroying our planet, because we finally realize that it's the only one we have. So we're taking care of it. Sounds great, doesn't it? But how do we come to this economy? I'm not sure I have the answer. Maybe we just need to start thinking differently. So let's erase the straight line and look beyond the market, beyond averages, beyond the here and now, and into the future. Let's start building an economy of well-being. The end.
Neither of the main parties at Westminster have the slightest interest in a well-being economy. It's been the Scottish Government policy since 2017. And that's what we could do if we had the full levers over the economic structure, the setting the real living wage as a minimum wage, setting benefits that actually act as a safety net for people, and supporting people as we try to into old age with dignity, with free personal care, allowing our young people to reach their potential with free tuition, as we already do. But you could start to make that a whole holistic approach if you had all the levers of power.
Many years up in the Highlands, going to the wee schools up there, and what staggered me at that time was a lot of those wee places were in old mizzen huts and army barracks or Air Force barracks that had been left over from the Second World War. I was out to Linlithgow the other day, and I passed this beautiful building, and it was a school. I stopped and took a photograph of it, because if you look about the place, I passed another one on the road from Douglas. Over in Cumnock, there's the Bryony campus. Down just a bit south from Troon is the Ayr with the new St Margaret's Academy. Beautiful buildings. And surely that is... See, I think that making the environment as nice as you can, Because it's very difficult to say to everybody, well, you know this, you're good and you're good and you're good. But if you surround them with nice things, as in the older times when they made towns attractive to bring people to them on market day, it makes people feel better, doesn't it? If you go down the road and you see a pile of rubbish and you see an old broken car or whatever it is, it doesn't make it, well, this is, I'm good enough for this. But if you walk into your high street and it looks glowing and there's a street cafe and this thing nice, it makes you feel that much better, doesn't it?
Oh, there's no question about that. And one of the very negative side impacts of austerity, I mean, the impact on individuals and families from cutting benefits and cutting funding to public services was clear. But what people don't realise is while austerity might make the balance sheet of the Treasury look better for a short time, oh, we're not spending so much money, it literally kills local economies. When they cut benefits back in the kind of 2015-ish, it took 6.7 billion out of the Scottish economy between the cut to the Scottish government's budget for them to spend and also the cuts to benefits. Well, that means people in local communities have less money to spend. They're not going into the shops to buy things. They're never going out for a meal. So the restaurant or the shop closes, or they employ fewer people, or they buy fewer goods from a local factory. So you just get this loss of what's called the multiplier effect, which is that if the government actually injects money into the economy in a fair way at the bottom, not at the top, which is what the Tories do, then it has this huge multiplication. And I call it trickle-up economics as opposed to trickle-down. You know, they like to make out if they give money to the super wealthy, gradually that will get spent and will trickle down to everybody else. But there's only so many Rolexes and yachts you can buy. Whereas if you actually give it to people at the bottom to make sure that you don't have family poverty and child poverty, then you're injecting that money into local economies. And people spend it, people use all of it, it's all active in the economy, rather than being put in an offshore bank account. And it'll all end up either back with the rich or back with the government through income tax or VAT, but it will have stimulated the economy as it has spiraled up through that pyramid. Whereas what they do is they're hoarding it, and what do we see? We see boarded up high streets, we see shops, restaurants struggling because people don't have money. And of course that's even worse right now with this cost of living crisis. Whereas if you actually give it to people at the bottom to make sure that you don't have family poverty and child poverty, then you're injecting that money into local economies. And people spend it, people use all of it, it's all active in the economy.
And of course, you see, it's a little bit of a fantasy, isn't it, this idea of money? And you hear them say, oh, it's the taxpayer, but actually it's more the Bank of England, because the Bank of England make most of the money. But you see that it's an invention of humankind, money. And if it really is, how can it be in short supply, therefore? Because if we invented it once, we can reinvent it. And people are trying to reinvent it, aren't they? They're trying to make cryptocurrencies. And, of course, credit card companies invent money all the time. They give a bit of plastic out, and heaven knows how much is on it. Maybe we're going into a different realm with that. But
well, it really is the Bank of England. I mean, the power that the UK government have with having a sovereign currency, and this is the importance of Scotland having a sovereign currency when they are independent, is that quantitative easing, which is a phrase that people will have heard after the crash in 2008 and probably have no idea what it means. It basically means that the Bank of England press print for more money, except that they don't actually even bother to print it. It's just digital money. And then eventually when that crisis eases, they did the same during COVID, they gradually try and pull it back in. So this narrative that we heard from Labour of there is no money left is just nonsense. That doesn't fit with modern monetary theory. The government, a government with a sovereign currency, can't actually run out of money. And particularly if they were using funding to deal with such awful policies as the two-child limit, what they're doing is reducing poverty, which reduces ill health, because poverty is the biggest single driver of ill health. But they're also injecting money into local economies, which will eventually return to them, as I say, in income tax, in VAT. So they're kind of watering the flower bed and getting a return.
See,
Whereas when they keep these really appalling policies going, saying we don't have money, that's nonsense. The problem for us in Scotland is we don't have our own currency, we're not independent, and we therefore don't have a sovereign Bank of Scotland where we could print money, if you like, to say, well, actually, we're going to invest in our incredible natural energy resources that somehow we can't get the Westminster government to invest in. And that would be Scotland's next boom. We didn't gain all that much from oil and gas. And the same is going to happen to us with green energy if we're not in control in investing in the infrastructure, owning the supply chains, gaining the jobs, and getting the return back to the taxpayer.
You see, when you come to the budget, or what do they call it now, the financial statement, really it's not a question of dishing out the money here and there, is it? It's a question of, I like these people, I'll give them something, but I don't like them people over there, so I won't give them something. That's really how it works these days.
Well, the most shocking one, obviously, was the Kwarteng budget. And, you know, being in the chamber, you know, my jaw was literally in my lap.
Now, Mr. Speaker, this brings me to the cap on bankers' bonuses. We are going to get rid of it.
Yeah. Because they were talking about removing the cap on bankers' bonuses. Now, the cap on bankers' bonuses, which was laid down by the EU, is that they can have 100% of their salary. So their salary can be doubled as a bonus, but it can't go higher than that unless shareholders agree. So if their shareholders agree, it can be 200% of their annual salary. And that isn't enough. And yet, at the very same breath, he was announcing that if people on very low incomes or working only a small number of hours didn't get a better job or work more hours to get more income, they'd lose their benefits. I mean, you know, this was just such a blatant money to the rich and taking from the poor. It was utterly shocking.
More vacancies than unemployed people to fill them. We need to encourage people to join the labour market. We will make work pay by reducing people's benefits if they don't fulfil their job search commitments. And we'll ask around 120,000 more people on universal credit to take active steps to seek more and better paid work or face having their benefits reduced.
And of course, with everything that they were doing, including taking away the 45% tax bracket from the kind of big high earners, what you saw was the stock market crashing, the pound crashing, while he was still on his feet. Because although he likes to make out, and they like to make out, the Conservatives like to make out, oh no, we need to keep in with the markets. Even there are billionaires who are saying, look, could you please tax us more? We don't mind contributing more, because actually you're giving us such appalling negative publicity. This is affecting the other things that we do. So, you know, there are people who are wealthy who also believe in fairness, and everybody should pay their way.
But you know, if you're going to give people a pay rise at the top, you should give an equal percentage to the bottom. I thought that was an interesting kind of idea.
But equally, also, you have to realise, if it's percentage, then that pay rise at the top is many, many multiples of what it is at the bottom. Yeah. So actually, you need to give a higher percentage to people at the bottom than at the in some European countries, the managing director or chief executive can only earn a certain number of multiples of the people at the bottom in the company. We don't have that. I mean, the UK now is the most unequal country after America. And that has widened since the crash. So while everyone else has seen their pay frozen or going backwards, in actual fact, the wealthy have tripled their wealth. And what we do not do in the UK is tax wealth. And that's something that we should be taxing.
So let's move on to, obviously we've been talking about all this stuff, but if we could have a little magical carpet and go off into the future a wee bitty, and we did take all the reserve powers from Westminster and we cited them in Holyrood. Give us some visions for the future so that we can wake people up to the possibilities of a new vibrant Scotland where we're in control and people can vote for something and get what they vote for rather than vote for something and get the Tories all the time.
Well, I think the important thing regarding the democratic deficit is we can never vote out a government from Westminster. You should be able to vote out a government if they haven't done what they promised to do. And that's something that we can never do. So we have some control over who's in power in Holyrood, but we have no control whatsoever over who's in power at Westminster. And to me, I think just the Scottish Government vision for Scotland is so totally different. It is based on fairer and greener, on recognising, you know, that we all live on this planet, and much as Scotland, in the scheme of the whole world, is a relatively small country, we have huge green energy potential. We don't need nuclear, we don't need fossil fuels, and Scotland's an incredibly inventive country. It's, you know, its history in engineering of things that Scotland invented in the past are just legion. So the potential for us to develop techniques that protect the environment, those techniques can be exported, that machinery can be exported, that know-how can be exported. But also there's direct gains. I mean, a simple one we can't get Westminster to invest in is pump storage hydro, which is when the wind is blowing fiercely, what we do is we turn wind farms off, instead of actually using that excess energy to pump water back up the mountain and store it so that when the wind isn't blowing...
It's a natural battery, isn't it?
Exactly. It's a natural battery, and it's the most cost-effective form of storing energy. Because all the big pump storage projects are in Scotland, UK government's not interested, even though we provide about a third of their green electricity for the whole UK. So that's bonkers. Green hydrogen is another thing that you can do when you have excess energy, whether from solar or wind or marine. And what we find in Europe, and this is one of the things Scotland gets to bring to the table for the EU, is they're now much more focused on green energy and energy security after what's happened in Ukraine. And Scotland has a huge potential to produce green hydrogen, not actually to heat our homes, but for things where there's not other easy alternatives. So very heavy transport, like buses or replacing diesel trains, also a certain amount of aviation, but also heavy industry like smelting and blast furnaces. So North Rhine-Westphalia, which is one of the lands in federal Germany, already has signed an MOU with the Scottish Government because they want our green hydrogen. And yet again, we can't get Westminster to invest in the infrastructure, and they're not interested in exporting at all. So these are things that would give people jobs, would give huge export income coming to Scotland, would allow us, if we were in control of those resources, which we're not. Energy is reserved to Westminster. So we have the bizarre situation of people living in the north of Scotland, surrounded by windmills, paying the highest energy bills in the UK. And Scotland is leading on floating offshore wind. We're leading in tidal stream up in the Pentland Firth, literally leading the world. And the problem is we may lose that lead because we're not getting the investment from Westminster. So making it a greener country obviously allows us to play our part in trying to make the world more sustainable, but also by leading in technology and technology development. And that naturally leads to more jobs, cleaner jobs, what we call a just transition from the oil and gas industry into the green industries, but also would allow us to have a national energy company. The Scottish Government looked at having a national energy company in 2017, but that would only have been a supply company because we don't have the powers. And therefore, when they looked into it, they found that actually the profit margins are quite small and there's far too many supply companies around. So it didn't go forward. The real money is in generating the energy. And that's what a future Scottish energy company would need to be. That the taxpayer, the Scottish citizen, had a stake, as we see in Norway, in harvesting, whether it's oil and gas, as in the remnants of the oil and gas industry, or particularly in the green energy going forward. And all of that means money into the Scottish Exchequer to spend on public services. It also means investment in jobs and in the supply chain in Scotland. And these are things that you just can't do if you don't have control over the powers. And that's where we are at the moment. But something as simple as employment law, being able to protect workers from this terrible strike spill.
It is simply unacceptable that strike action is disrupting so many lives. We will legislate to require unions to put pay offers to a member vote.
But also being able to say that the minimum wage should actually be the same as the real living wage. These kind of things. The Scottish Government promote it, they get employers to sign a pledge, but we can't make it law because we don't control employment law. And Labour saw to that. That was in the Smith Commission after the 2014 referendum. It was Labour who voted against Scotland having control over workers' rights. So, you know, devolution was never strong enough. The vow from Gordon Brown was not remotely delivered. And what we have at the moment is devolution going backwards. So in actual fact, we not just can't realise that incredible vision of a fairer, greener Scotland in the future, but actually we're in danger of losing what we have at the moment.
Yeah. And that other thing with the energy, basing everything on the price of gas.
At the start of the Ukraine crisis, the UK's exposure to Russian gas was 4%. We should not have been in difficulty. But if you look across Europe, most people's energy bills there have gone up to being £500, £600 a year more. Here, it's £2,000. So ours have tripled, whereas, you know, theirs rose. But they had a much bigger exposure. Germany used 55% of Russian gas, and yet they managed to cut the VAT from 19% to 7%, and that would probably be revenue neutral, but yet the UK government would rather make money out of the VAT on fuel bills rather than help people get through the crisis. So while there's an energy crisis across Europe, the UK should actually have been relatively cushioned to that. But what we have is people in the UK paying the highest energy bills in Europe and people in Scotland paying the highest energy bills in the UK. And it's just ridiculous. And adding into that is things like transmission charges. Our energy generators in Scotland, in the north of Scotland, but also all over Scotland, but from the north of Scotland where the wind farms are, they pay 15 times the rate to use the national grid as an energy generator in the middle of England. So again, you're having companies who may be looking at Scotland and thinking, yeah, we have to take account of that, because a large wind farm on the south of England versus one in the north of Scotland, the difference is 45 million a year. So, you know, that kind of thing will be holding back investment in Scotland. And, you know, these are opportunities that actually come for ordinary people to have jobs, to have cheaper energy. And it is that the energy market in the UK doesn't make sense at all. As you say, pricing electricity on the basis of gas, Scotland's only got one gas generator left. And even for the whole UK, more than half the electricity is from wind. Well, wind didn't get any more expensive. So why are these companies allowed to make an absolute killing because of the war in Ukraine? I mean, you look at Norway, you know, the Norwegian government has a half share in Statoil, as was, Equinor now, and Equinor is moving less from oil and gas and more into renewables, indeed including renewables off the coast of Scotland. So, you know, a lot of the energy companies are here. They're state energy companies like EDF. They're just not our state energy company.
So how about one thing that you'd love to do with Scotland if we had a power in particular?
Okay. Well, I think for me, probably the biggest difference we could make would be having control of full range of taxation and social security. We at the moment only control 29% of tax, which is the income tax bands, and about 16% of benefits. So if we could control both of those, you can then make a logical system where you are supporting people at the bottom with a safety net when they need it. But then as people become successful, you're expecting them to contribute to everybody else. And that way you can simplify the tax system and make sure you collect all the tax. One of the bizarre things in Westminster is they spend so much money chasing benefit fraud, when actually people not paying their taxes is more than 10 times the size. So to me, if you made a fairer, simplified system, you would actually have more taxation in, but you could make sure that you looked after everybody. And that is the basis of a well-being economy, which is that you value every individual from the moment they're born and realise that over their lifetime they will contribute to their local community, that will contribute to the fabric of your society, and it will also contribute to a stronger economy.
See, even if you don't do anything, when you're born, you provide employment for nurses and doctors and pamper makers and baby formula makers, don't you? And when you're at the other end of the spectrum, there's a nice funeral director or a cremation service that deals with you. So, and even after
I don't think you should keep this bit in.
even after you've gone, I mean, Elvis is still making money. So, I had a conversation with a lady yesterday, and she's got mental health problems and heaven knows what. But I said to her, look, just calm down. It doesn't matter. You're providing someone with some employment because whoever's caring for you and helping you, they're getting their money by that system. So relax and don't be too...
But equally, whether it's physical health or mental health, we all have the good phases in our lives and the bad phases in our lives. The times when we're needing help, but also the time when we're providing help to somebody else. And I think instead of this, shirkers and workers, strivers and skivers, this, what I called when I went to Westminster, the politics of other, describing disabled people as if they're lazy. You should realise that, we are a village and, we all need to actually work together to raise our children, to let them reach their full potential. And then when we're older, they'll be the ones that are pulling us along. So, this "we're all in it together" was a soundbite, but we were never all in it together.
Makes you feel a bit creepy, that.
It does, but, the vision of a well-being economy in Scotland, where you're literally recognising the economic sense of eliminating poverty, of allowing everyone to achieve what they could achieve and reach their full potential, means that you have a much better society and a much better economy. So even for those who are quite hard-headed, the recognition that abandoning children or punishing children or describing the third or fourth child in the family as not worthy of support means that you are actually creating something that will be a drag on your society and economy in the future, instead of actually realising people are worthwhile in themselves and you have no idea what they could achieve if you give them the springboard at the beginning of their lives.
You get things that are too big. People can't cope with more than 100 people, really. And you as a politician have to deal with far more than that. But in your own gebiet, in your own area, you have to...
But I think also, one part of the well-being economy going forward is what's called the 20-minute communities.
Oh, yes.
Where instead of people commuting, 2.5 hours each way, not seeing their kids, getting home late, leaving in the dark, coming home in the dark, no facilities, these huge housing estates. The idea is actually that you try... through planning and development to be saying, well, okay, if we're building a community this size, this is what we need. We need a primary school, we need a doctor, we need some shops, because we want people to meet when they go out to get the bread and milk and get to know each other. We want people to walk and cycle rather than get in their cars. So it is very much about trying to bring back that community in whether it's building new communities to produce the housing, or whether it's how you redevelop some of your cities. And you see even from things like Merchant City in Glasgow, the ability to actually refurbish really terrible parts, neglected parts of cities, and create very vibrant places for people to live. And to me, one of the things I think we should be doing with our high streets is actually bringing people back in to live in them. Because then you need cafes and you need a shop that will sell you a paper on a Sunday morning, or somewhere you can sit down and read the paper on a Sunday morning and meet your neighbours. So, there's quite a lot we can do, but some of these things we have powers over and some of these things we don't. And the public often are not clear where power lies. But it's only when you have the full range, literally from your currency right through to your planning law, your health system, you know, your social security, that you can actually build that holistic framework that supports everybody. And the problem is we're in danger of going in the opposite direction. And, you know, you get people now who are beginning to say, oh, we should get rid of the Scottish Parliament. I mean, what does it ever do? I want it to go back to Westminster. What I would say to those people is a wee reminder that the NHS in Scotland was always a separate legal entity. And even before devolution, it wasn't managed by the Department of Health. It was managed by the Secretary of State for Scotland. So just you think about Alistair Jack running the Scottish NHS. And if that doesn't wake you up to the dangers of direct rule, then nothing will.